Welcome back to Stand. You're on with Kelly and Denali Chewbacca, and our guest today is U.S. House candidate Nick Begich. So, Nick, as you well know, election integrity is a really big deal to us in Alaska up here, and there's been a lot of concerns raised with it, especially because recently the Alaska Supreme Court ruled that Eric Hafner, a felon currently incarcerated on the East Coast, is
never been in Alaska,
and he's somehow on our ballot as one of the top 4 finishers, and he's a serious contender for House.
Yeah, competing against you. He could be our next U.S. congressman. Right?
Yeah. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that, on the Hafner affair, and also what your thoughts are on increasing election integrity in Alaska and the rest of the United States should you win.
Yes, these are great questions. First of all, I was surprised to learn. I remember the first time that I learned, a few years ago, that in fact you can run whether you're a resident of a state or not for Congress. It really doesn't matter. And we see, because of ranked choice voting, we see more and more people from outside of Alaska registering to run in Alaska. They're not residents. And in the case, as you point out, of Eric Hafner, he's never lived in Alaska, never been to Alaska. But there's nothing constitutionally that prevents somebody from doing that as long as they live in the district before they take a seat in Congress. So what he's doing is constitutional. It's a little odd. And I think in most cases around the country, people see that, they recognize that that's not truly reflective of who they are. Typically people are going to be electing people that are from the district that they're in, and certainly from the state that they're representing. But yes, so Eric Hafner did make the ballot, and this is one of the strange wrinkles of ranked choice voting. You had some folks drop off, and he received enough votes that he became one of the top 4 finishers in the end in the general election. And you saw what the Democrats did. They took this all the way to the Supreme Court because they didn't want to see a second Democrat on the ballot. And it wasn't anything to do. It was interesting. It wasn't about whether Eric Hafner was a resident of Alaska. It wasn't about really whether Eric Hafner was a felon. It was about, for them, whether they had a second Democrat on the ballot. And they acknowledged in their court filings for the first time as a party that a second person from their party could create problems for their preferred Democrat candidate. And so finally, we have an admission from the Democrat Party in Alaska. Ranked choice voting is problematic for them. We know it's problematic for others. And so that was progress, I think. But look, at the end of the day, they're going to have to defend their record. Mary Peltola's got to defend her record. She has not been forthcoming about which presidential candidate she would like to see in the president's office in 2025. And so Eric Hafner has. And that's one of the interesting things about running elections. You get to find out who people really are and what they believe and what their positions are. And from what I've understood, Eric Hafner is a strong supporter of Kamala Harris, and I assume that he's giving some Democrats an alternative choice.
That's right. She said she was open to supporting President Trump because obviously President Trump's going to sweep the state of Alaska, and she has not committed to supporting Kamala Harris. She's since backtracked on the support of Trump because she got such backlash for it. However, I think you're right that when she's in D.C., Mary Peltola is a far left Democrat, but when she's in Alaska, she has to play moderate to right of center because that's what her constituency is. And so we're seeing that same flip-flopping that's really hurting Kamala Harris right now with the base that would otherwise support her. And I've also seen the polls that show Eric Hafner has a lot more support in Alaska than he should. And I agree with you that this jungle primary that has come in with ranked choice voting, the problem is that it's taken us away from protected primaries where the parties actually got to screen and vet candidates. So we have these charlatans running that have no screening or vetting. And we know a good number of Republicans, there's been media coverage on this, who went and voted for Eric Hafner to put him on the ballot so that it would weaken the Democrat base and quite likely give you a victory, in the same way that we know that there was a run on the Senate candidate in 2022 who was the Hollywood actress. All of her donations donations were from outside. She never got a penny from an Alaskan because she was here posing as an Alaskan with a fake name and a fake Alaska address to try and win our Senate seat. And that's what happens when you have these jungle primaries and this ranked choice voting that actually doesn't represent Alaskans at all. But it'll be interesting to see what happens with this. This, as you said, this wrinkle in ranked choice voting could actually play in our favor, where Republicans have actually gotten together on this, if you will, and have said, let's just treat this as a normal primary, and we are consolidating the base and choosing to drop out. And I'm really happy about the choices that we made in this congressional race, and instead put one candidate forward. And it'll be really great to see that the will of the people is actually reflected in the choice of the election. But Denali, you had another question, right?
I did, absolutely. So speaking of Mary and how poor her representation of Alaska is, I wanted to ask, we've noticed that she's missed approximately 45% of the votes that she's supposed to show up for in Congress. She's sabotaged bills that she's put forward. She's clearly not doing what's best for Alaska while she's down there in the DC swamp. And I wanted to ask you, how do you plan on making up for what's essentially 2 years of representation that Alaska has lost? We have one House seat, and we've basically lost 2 critical years to pick up our state and turn things around for us. So how will you make up for that should you win?
That's a great question. Let me just start by saying there was a survey that came out this week from Wallet Hub, and Wallet Hub did a survey on the hardest working states in the country. And Alaska was number 2 behind North Dakota. And when you look at the numbers more closely, you see that actually Alaska's number 1 in terms of hours worked per worker, right? At 41 hours a week on average. So number 1 in the country for hours worked. And we have a representative right now that is often not showing up for work. And that doesn't really represent the hardworking people of our state. The hardest working people in America are not being represented by someone who's working hard. And so there is going to be a lot of work to be done to catch up over the last 2 years. And what I've done in every opportunity that I have, I mentioned the opportunity with President Trump to speak with him about the executive orders targeting Alaska. I've spoken with Speaker Mike Johnson. I've spoken with House Majority Whip Tom Emmer, and I've had conversations extensively with Steve Scalise, the majority leader in the House, about this issue. And I've told them to a person, look, we need to not just push back against the executive orders. I want President Trump to repeal these orders 100%, but we have to do more. Okay. And what we need to do is we need to lock in Alaska's right to produce its resources into law. So there are opportunities in the Congress. Budget reconciliation is the first major opportunity for us to find as many of these priorities that we can that will have a budgetary impact that would pass what's called the Byrd Rule in the Senate, so that we can move this through budget reconciliation and lock in more tightly Alaska's sovereign right to produce its resources. And so that's the number 1 priority that I have for Alaska going down to DC, is to work with the Republican conference, the Republican majority in the next Congress, to lock in Alaska's ability to produce, so that that pendulum doesn't swing so far for our state every time that a Democrat gets into office and decides they want to turn us off.
It's a really good point. It seems even when it is locked into law, there's executive orders that overturn it. But I really like the way that you just captioned that. We have a hardworking state represented by a congresswoman who's hardly working. And that is a problem, because it's not gonna do us well. We're just gonna have to work harder to make up for what's not being done, or how the government overreach is absolutely oppressing us up here in Alaska. But speaking of oppression, it feels like the young generation feels particularly oppressed because they cry about it a lot. And I know that Denali just experienced a lot of that in college.
Oh yeah. I mean, I even went to a conservative school, just graduated from Texas A&M, Gig 'em Aggies.
Gig 'em.
But one of the things I really noticed down there, even being a political science major, was it was really, really difficult to get any of the Republicans there to say, oh yeah, I lean right. They were super secretive about it. Always like, okay, well, I mean, like, I'm not for Kamala. I guess I would vote for Trump. Or
like being conservative is a point of shame.
Oh, yeah. It was almost like a secret message kind of thing. Like, oh, yeah, I lean right. Wink. And it was so interesting because, the Democrats are running around campus with the blue hair and the Biden-Harris T-shirts and vote Beto and all of this stuff. And I wanted to ask you, as who basically you'd be one of the younger members of the House, what are your thoughts on this? Why do you think the younger generation feels so repressed to say, I am a Republican? And how do you think you could lead by example to change that?
Boy, I love that question because there's so much pressure put onto people through mainstream media sources. And what we've seen, and interestingly enough, we've seen the Democrats pay influencers, social media influencers on TikTok and Instagram and other social media platforms to promote their messages. These are paid actors, paid influencers who are going out into their target demographics and presenting a message to the youth. And it's not surprising, but it is disappointing to see Democrats resort to this because they recognize their ideas are failed ideas. Their ideas don't have facts on their side, and their ideas require deception in order to be sold to the public. And that's what they do. And so they put a lot of pressure on folks through those indirect methods to try to influence public opinion. But I think what happens, and I'll tell you, I've known many people, many young people, friends of mine, who, when I was younger, they kind of leaned left or they identified sort of more with the left side of philosophy. They get their first paycheck. Hey, wait a minute. What happened to all of this money that I made? Oh, well, it had to go to this bucket and that bucket and this tax and that tax. And pretty quickly, people start to lean a little more conservative because they recognize that they're not getting their money's worth. The government's taking that money, and what are they doing with it? What benefit do they see? And so I think when people graduate and they hit the real world and they start to have to make tough decisions about budgets and about how much they're going to have to work in order to pay for the lifestyle that they were hoping to have, those things start to get people shook loose of some of the indoctrination that happens even in a conservative university. You went to Texas A&M, I went to Baylor down the road. I mean, I was at a conservative school too, but I could see, the same trend lines that you're describing happening even then. So I can remember going down and visiting the campus here a number of years ago and seeing Beto O'Rourke signs on that campus. And I was very surprised to see it. But yet Texas remains a Republican state. Ted Cruz is going to win that state again. And I think the reason is because when we encounter real life and we get out of the collegiate bubble and we start to have to work and build our own families and do those things, we recognize actually these policies on the left don't work for regular people.
Yeah, I think that's right. And one of the things we're doing is encouraging our kids to speak up now because, as I've told them, there's a lot more people in your classes who think the way you think and they don't know how to articulate it and they don't have the courage to. They don't know that when they say something, there won't be any responses back. And so one of the easy ways to speak up is just to simply ask questions. And if you ask questions, you'll be surprised to see that the liberal indoctrination is really only one layer thick.
Well, and the amount of people that come up to you after and go, listen, I wasn't going to say it, but I totally agree with you.
But that's right. And the professors and teachers often don't have an answer beyond what they were trying to just drill into people's heads. And so it starts to unravel really quickly, which I think is a good way to start. Well, this has been a great conversation with Nick Begich. We're going to pick up on the other side of the break and talk about really interesting policy conversations. Policy means the things that affect our pocketbooks. So let's pick up with that. AlaskансForNickBegich.com. You've been on Stand with Kelly and Denali Chewbacca, and you can find us at standshow.org. We'll see you on the other side of this break. Stand by.